I have never been a man inclined toward mysticism. I was raised among libraries, archives, and rational investigations, but no amount of reading, no matter how meticulous, could have prepared me for what I found buried beneath the forgotten foundations of the Ainsworth house, hidden among the damp hills of Huddersfield in northern England. The estate had been locked up for exactly 75 years. Its rusted gates, stained glass windows overgrown with suffocating vines, and the heavy silence surrounding it weren't mere signs of neglect. They were the markers of a deliberate erasure, as if the entire village had chosen, in unison, to delete that place from existence. If this story has already made you uncomfortable, perhaps you should subscribe to the channel. Trust me, the next revelations are far more disturbing. My involvement began as absurdly as it was inevitable. A handwritten letter sent from a solicitor's office in Leeds, informing me that I had inherited a property from my mother's family, who had emigrated to Brazil before the Second World War. The name on the envelope was Judith Ainsworth, a complete stranger to me. The letter came with a will, containing a single handwritten clause at the end. Never enter the basement before sunset on the 13th cycle. The seal must remain. That line sent chills through me, but not enough to turn back, partly driven by journalistic curiosity, and partly by something deeper, something I couldn't yet name, but that called to me with quiet insistence. I arrived in Huddersfield at the end of October, when the mornings are wrapped in mist and the smell of wet soil saturates everything. The house stood along a secondary road hidden by trees that looked more dead than alive. It was a Victorian mansion, built of grey stone with a slanted roof covered in moss. None of the nearby neighbors dared to approach. I noticed it in the avoiding eyes at the village and the hushed murmurs at the local pub. The house's energy was dense. Crossing the front door, I felt a subtle shift in the air, as if I had stepped into another time. The curtains were intact but thick with dust. Books still lined the shelves. A detuned piano in the corner bore open sheet music dated 1938. What struck me the most, however, was the lack of structural decay. The house seemed cared for, despite being officially uninhabited. In the second-floor hallway, I found a mirror covered with a brown sheet. When I pulled it off, I saw my reflection, and something behind it. A motionless silhouette, dark, faceless. I turned immediately. Nothing, but the weight of that absent gaze lingered for hours. The following night, I heard noises coming from the basement. Rhythmic scratching, wood creaking, whispers, a voice, female, hoarse, saying my name. The basement door was reinforced with chains and 7 rusted padlocks. Etched above them was a nearly imperceptible marking, Roman numeral 13, scratched out and repeated 3 times. From that moment on, I knew something down there was waiting, not by accident, not by chance, but by legacy. This wasn't a mere inheritance. It was a summons, and I had answered it. I arrived at Ainsworth House under a gray morning sky, the damp air biting at my skin, as if the very atmosphere of Huddersfield wished to warn me away. The narrow road leading to the estate wound past stone cottages with slate roofs and small gardens overtaken by moss and brambles. In the distance, the hills rose steep and indistinct, half hidden in fog. I pulled into the old iron gate at precisely 10:37 a.m., shifting the antique key in a squealing lock that felt older than any I had ever encountered. The gate creaked open, revealing the courtyard paved in faded cobblestone and framed by skeletal hedges, thorny and untrimmed. Inside the house, the dread settled around me even before I dared to enter. I carried in only a small satchel and a camera, with notebooks in hand. The entrance hall was vast, with an oaken staircase spiraling upward, each step coated in a veneer of dust. Cobwebs draped the corners heavily like curtains at dusk, darker in places. Sunlight slanted through high windows, revealing motes swirling in the still air, like trapped spirits. My first hours were spent methodically cataloging what I could see in daylight. I made my way from the entrance hall into an east-facing drawing room, where a thick Persian rug lay askew. The furniture was dusty, but the upholstery bore patterns of deep crimson and gold, frayed at the seams, but eerily pristine in shape. Paintings hung unevenly, landscapes that appeared to bleed into shadow, and portraits of stern men and women. The eyes in several frames seemed to track my movement. I moved into the library, where shelves rose ceiling-high. Leather-bound volumes, some with gilt lettering, lined the walls. I ran my fingers over the spines, reading titles in languages I recognized and languages I did not. Among them, Chronicles of the West Riding, Memento Mori, Rituale Anglicanum. An open volume lay on a reading table, open to a page dated 1927, describing a local tragedy, the silent winter child. the birth and disappearance of a newborn girl in Huddersfield. Beneath the typed text, someone had scrawled, in ink, Ainsworth connection, in spidery handwriting. The solicitor's letter mentioned that Judith Ainsworth's body had never been located. Instead, the house had been sealed after her disappearance in 1949, the day after the winter solstice. Local whispers had said she went downstairs to finish the ritual and was never seen again. The probate record included one line, sealed at request of Reverend Thomas Eldred on behalf of the estate, December 21, 1949. Reverend Thomas Eldred, a name that seemed to stitch across generations, had authority to seal the house. That fact deepened my unease. On the second afternoon, I found a small brass key hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the study on the second floor. The room was faintly perfumed with old paper and wax. Cushioned chairs sat in disarray. On the desk lay ledger books, meticulously organized by year. In a lower drawer, I discovered a packet of unopened envelopes. One was marked, to be opened only by bloodline, Judith Ainsworth, December 22, 1948. I carefully opened it. If you are reading this, then the line has bent but not broken. You carry our name, and with it, the burden. The seal must remain until the 13th cycle concludes. If you undo it early, the pact is voided, and we are all damned anew. There is a record, one the villagers never burned, hidden in the altar wall of the church in Huddersfield. It bears the mark, seek it only when the wind howls from the east. My heart pounded. 13th cycle. It sounded like nonsense. Ritual nonsense. Yet the tone was grave, sincere, and entirely unfettered by exaggeration. I tucked the letter back into the envelope and resealed it. Night came, and with it came my first encounter with fear so profound I nearly fled. I slept in one of the upstairs bedrooms, where a four-poster bed lay beneath a canopy so heavy it swallowed the ceiling. My dreams churned. I saw 13 candles burning in a circle, a soft chant in Latin, and a word repeated on my lips after I awoke. Sanguinum. The room was cold anyway, but when I woke, sweat clung to my skin. The following morning, I dared the attic for the first time. The stairs to the attic were narrow, the air stale with mold. Dust rose in clouds as I climbed. The attic space was imposing. Vaulted ceiling, bare stone walls, no insulation. On one wall, dozens of framed portraits lay face down. With trembling hands, I turned over the first. A boy, gaunt, eyes sunken, a faint burn scar on his temple. The frame edge had been deeply scratched. At the bottom, italic script, Matthew Ainsworth, Moonfall Ritual, Cycle 6. I turned more over. Each portrait had names, dates, sometimes lane markings, 13 tally marks carved into the wooden backing. Several were crossed out, faded, restored, but one portrait, hidden beneath a heavy canvas, chilled me. A woman with eyes so alike mine it hurt to look. Name beneath in a copper plate hand, Judith Ainsworth, Cycle 13, begins. By midday, I realized my arrival triggered Cycle 13. I stared at the portrait, feeling a connection. Bloodline, maybe. The painted eyes haunted me. Shadows around the frame seemed alive. I spent the afternoon walking in the village under the pretext of gathering supplies and stretching my legs after days in the house. I entered the small general store near the village green. The proprietor, a solemn woman in her 60s, greeted me with quiet courtesy until I mentioned the house. At the word Ainsworth, her eyes lost warmth, her voice lowered. "Oh," she said, "that place. Still standing, is it?" "Yes. I inherited it. From Judith." Her lips pressed thin. "Best you keep the cellar locked. Judith always said the stone had memory." "What stone?" I asked. She paused, looked away. "Do not go to the church after nightfall." I pressed for more history, more gossip, but she backed away and I left with groceries I didn't need. One cold evening over soup by a single lamp, I gathered courage and ventured to the church mentioned in Judith's letter. It stood at the periphery of the village, built of dark stone, its spire blackened, no signs of regular service. The gate was snapped open. I found a rear entrance hidden by an overgrowth of ivy. Inside, the air reeked of rot and something cloyingly sweet. Pews were overturned. The altar remained, its panel behind it newly replaced, lighter wood than the rest of the aged structure. I pried it open. Inside lay a sealed tin box. Within the box, a small leather-bound book titled Liturgy of the 13th Cycle, a necklace of human teeth, and an iron medallion bearing the same symbol. 3 eyes in an inverted triangle ringed by spirals. That night, I translated the opening pages. On the night of the blood moon, in the final year of each 13th cycle, the vessel must descend. The pact is fed by silence, by memory erased, by the blood of our own. So we remain, so we remember. Flipping pages, I saw lists of names. Cycle 11, Vessel, Elias Ainsworth. Cycle 12, Vessel, Miriam Ainsworth. Cycle 13, Vessel, pending underneath, in fresh black ink. New blood arrived. Cycle 13 begins. The discovery felt like a noose tightening around my heritage. When I slammed the book shut, the silence in the house seemed to swell into something oppressive. Later that night, I heard the basement door's locks rattling. I ran to the staircase. One chain lay broken. The heavy wooden door remained, but one padlock hung slightly ajar. My pulse raced. I drew my camera, heart pounding. Outside, the wind hissed against the eaves. I did not sleep again that night. By the fourth morning, my journal was already thick with transcriptions, sketches, and desperate questions. The days passed with a strange elasticity inside Ainsworth House. Mornings dripping slowly into afternoons. Afternoons swallowed whole by a darkness that seemed to descend earlier with each passing evening. Time did not behave normally there. It was during one of those long, disoriented afternoons that I discovered the false panel in the master bedroom closet. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a warped piece of back paneling, but something about the shape, its too perfect symmetry, caught my attention. I tapped it, and the sound rang hollow. I pried gently at the edges until it gave way, revealing a compartment filled with tightly packed boxes wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside the first box, I found a leather portfolio, brittle with age, sealed with a wax crest bearing the now familiar symbol, the three-eyed triangle surrounded by concentric spirals. I broke the seal. Within were several personal letters, hospital records, and a set of drawings done in charcoal. The drawings disturbed me profoundly. Deformed human figures, their eyes sewn shut, standing in circles, holding hands, with one figure always kneeling at the center, arms raised, mouth gaping. In one sketch, 13 figures stood around a stone basin filled with what was unmistakably blood. The date at the bottom, March 4th, 1921. Among the documents, I found a letter from Miriam Ainsworth to her brother Elias. It was dated June 11th, 1937. Brother, the cycle is closer now. I see it in the animals. Calves born without eyes, birds falling dead in mid-flight. The well behind the orchard bubbles on moonless nights. I fear what we've become, but more, I fear what happens if we stop. You know as well as I that we were chosen, and that the pact demands continuity. I can no longer look at the portraits. Mother's eyes accuse me, even from the dark. Pray the vessel comes willing this time. If not, the binding will fail, and the hunger will return to the soil. The letter was signed simply, Miriam. The term vessel echoed again, this time with a gravity that felt closer, more personal. There was no question anymore. Something had been sustained here, generation after generation, fed by sacrifice, protected by secrecy, and masked as inheritance. But what exactly had they bound, and to what? I turned to the second box. It contained dozens of photographs, sepia-toned, many of them scratched, several soaked in water damage. Most disturbing were the ones that had been deliberately altered, faces erased with acid, entire children cut out. One group photo caught my attention. A long banquet table, 12 adults seated, one child at the head. The child's face was completely burned through. On the back it read, Winter Solstice, Cycle 9, Huddersfield Chapter. What was the chapter? Were there others? I brought the photo closer to the window. In the corner of the room, a shadow moved. I spun around. Nothing. Just the door swinging slightly ajar. I locked it behind me. I spent the next morning in the library. I had avoided the lowest shelves until now. They were encrusted with mildew, the books swollen with moisture, but something compelled me to investigate. Behind a row of legal records from the early 1900s, I found a journal bound in stitched fabric. The spine bore no title. Inside, the pages were filled with small, frantic handwriting. The diary belonged to a boy named Edwin Ainsworth, and his entries spanned 3 years, from 1939 to 1941. He couldn't have been more than 12 when he began writing. March 13th, 1939. I heard them chanting again, below the floor. I asked Father what it meant, and he slapped me, said the walls remember, that I should not ask again. June 5th, 1939. Mother won't eat. She says the time is near, that the child must be found. I asked which child. She cried. December 22nd, 1940. They made me wear the robe, the one with the stitched eye. Said I was lucky to be chosen. I don't feel lucky. One page had been violently torn out. The next entry resumed with a simple phrase. The door in the cellar opened. I searched the rest of the shelf. Behind the crumbling tax records, I found another smaller book, this one with a brass lock. I broke it open with a chisel. Inside were records, ritual dates, phases of the moon, lists of names. Many bore the surname Ainsworth, others were simply listed as offered. Under each was a check mark or an X. I flipped to the last entry. It read, pending, new arrival, cycle 13, line preserved, vessel identified, male, 37, no offspring, direct descendant of Elias. I read the line again, male, 37, no offspring, direct descendant of Elias. It was me. I dropped the book. I had never known who my grandfather was. My mother never spoke of her family, and yet here I was, fitting the profile exactly. At that moment, I understood that this had not been a random inheritance. I had not stumbled into a story. I had been drawn into a design, carefully preserved, patiently executed, over more than a century. The weight of the realization was suffocating. I ran to the attic, needing to see the portraits again. I turned over every single one, searching for clues, something to defy what I had read, but the pattern was undeniable. Every 13 years, every new cycle, one chosen, always an Ainsworth. Some were children, some were women, but always one. And in cycle the 13th, the portrait slot was empty, waiting, until I noticed a new frame lying beside the others wrapped in linen. I unwrapped it. It was a photograph of me, taken I believe the day I arrived. I don't know who took it. I had never seen that camera. The frame bore the inscription, Cycle 3, accepted. I screamed. The next day I returned to the village, intent on confronting someone, anyone. I found the grocer again. I demanded answers. She looked me in the eyes and said quietly, "You shouldn't have come alone. We all tried to forget. The pact was supposed to end with Judith, but she never completed the 13th. She left the vessel unclaimed." I asked her what that meant. What happened to the unfinished cycle? She looked around, lowered her voice. "Then it begins again. 13 years, 13 offerings. And you're the root now. The soil knows your blood." After the revelations in the attic, after seeing my own face framed beneath the words, Cycle 13, accepted, I could no longer remain in the house without confronting the truth in the village. The realization that the Ainsworth legacy had not ended but merely waited for my arrival gnawed at me with a hollow, sickening certainty. There were too many gaps, too many details that no diary, no family archive could answer. I needed people, witnesses, records not preserved by the Ainsworths themselves, but by the town that had enabled them. I began at the Huddersfield Library, a gray limestone building that stood like a mausoleum at the edge of the old city center. The municipal archives were housed in a windowless basement where humidity clung to the pages like a second skin. I requested public records related to the Ainsworth estate, land deeds, legal proceedings, and anything tied to Judith or her immediate family. The clerk, a thin man in a frayed waistcoat, hesitated when I mentioned the name. "You said Ainsworth?" he asked, glancing at my identification again. "Yes, family estate, south of the viaduct, sealed in 1949. He nodded slowly, then typed something into the terminal. "You'll want boxes 16 through 19. Restricted access, but given your name, I suppose that won't be a problem." He handed me a temporary pass without further comment. Inside box 16, I found the town council minutes from December of 1948, just weeks before the house was sealed. A small typewritten note stood out. Agenda item E8. Final request from Miss Judith Ainsworth to isolate property grounds as sacred memorial land under Section 12 of the Rural Protection Act. Grounds cited, preservation of historical right and prevention of spiritual contamination. There was a second annotation, handwritten in the margins. Approved in silence, not to be challenged. What did it mean to approve something in silence? I kept digging. Box 17 held property disputes. I discovered that several parcels surrounding the Ainsworth estate had been bought at well below market value between 1921 and 1935, all purchased through shell corporations traced back to a single entity, the Church of the New Resurrection. The name surfaced again, Reverend Thomas Eldred. I asked the librarian about the church. He seemed hesitant, but pointed me to a retired historian who volunteered in the archives on Tuesdays, Mr. Leonard Granger, now 84, and a lifelong resident of Huddersfield. I returned that Tuesday. Mr. Granger was seated near the genealogical indexes, sipping tea and scribbling in the margins of a parish registry. When I introduced myself, his eyes sharpened behind thick glasses. "You're from the Ainsworth line," he said. Not a question. "Yes," I replied. "I came into the house recently. I'm trying to understand. You shouldn't be here." He leaned in. "Judith was the last. It was supposed to end with her. The seal was final. She promised us." I asked him what the seal was, what the pact entailed. Granger exhaled slowly. 13 cycles, 13 vessels. The first pact began in 1833. Something was brought here, or unearthed. No one agrees on that part. But the elders, those still lucid, said it was bound in blood. Human, specifically Ainsworth blood. Every 13 years, a vessel was chosen. One child, always within the family. The town turned a blind eye, because, he paused, the pact gave prosperity. That's what they believed. And what happened if a vessel wasn't chosen? His voice dropped to a whisper. The land starved. Crops failed. Livestock miscarried. People vanished. The soil turned black. He looked around, then added, we all knew. The council, the parishes, even the school headmasters. If someone asked too much, they were transferred, or they disappeared. He reached into his satchel and removed a small notebook, yellowed and fragile. These are clippings. I kept them. The notebook contained newspaper articles dating from 1926 to 1948, most of which had been heavily redacted or removed from local records. One headline read, "Local boy found in river. Foul play suspected, no charges filed." Another, "Family of 5 vanishes. Home found, empty with bloodied threshold." Each was marked with the symbol, the 3 eyes inside the inverted triangle. "These are the ones who resisted," Granger said. "Those who refused to offer, or those who tried to run." I asked about Reverend Eldred. Granger's face darkened. He wasn't born here, arrived in 1917, took over the parish after the previous reverend died suddenly. Eldred wrote the original liturgy of the pact. We found pages of it in the bell tower wall. Latin, half-mad scribbles. He claimed the entity was older than the hills, said it came before the Romans, that the Ainsworths were merely its stewards. "And what entity?" I asked. Granger shrugged, but not out of ignorance, out of fear. They never called it by name, only as the root below. Said it lives in stone, sleeps in the gaps between words, and wakes when the line is broken. I returned to the house that evening, shaken. The next morning, a letter was slid under the front door. No postage, no envelope, just a folded page in faded ink. We tried to let it die with her. We buried the altar, salted the doors, and bricked the lower passage. But blood calls to stone, and now the 13th begins anew. Leave before the moon turns. It was unsigned. That day, I contacted a local journalist, Eleanor Wright, whose name I found in one of Granger's clippings. She had once published a column titled "Folklore of Forgotten Hamlets" in the Huddersfield Herald. We met in the garden behind a cafe near Westgate. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, cautious. "I always wanted to write about Ainsworth House," she admitted, "but any editor I pitched it to told me the same thing. Not worth the lawsuits. Who would sue?" She smirked grimly. "You're thinking too literally. It wasn't about money. It was about silence. The council blackballed anyone who pried too deep. One reporter went missing in 1992. Another moved to Canada without a word. You start writing about blood rights and family vessels, and suddenly your brakes stop working." I showed her the ritual book. She refused to touch it. "You need to leave," she said. "Not investigate. Leave. That house was the spine of something vile, and you're being offered up to finish what she didn't." When I asked her what she meant, she said only this: "The 13th vessel doesn't end the cycle. It renews it." The moment I broke the final lock on the basement door, the air in the house changed. Not just colder, denser, as if the architecture itself were holding its breath. For weeks, that door had taunted me with groans and rattles, one chain snapping after another, as though something below had been waiting. When the last padlock gave way, it did so without resistance. I opened the door. Darkness poured out like smoke. The stairs descended steeply into the earth, carved not from wood, but from stone, pale, veined with red, and worn smooth by generations of footsteps. I counted 13 steps. Of course it was 13. At the bottom, I found the first chamber. It was not a simple root cellar, as the property documents suggested, but a vaulted space of dressed stone, the walls covered in faded murals. I raised my flashlight and saw what I had feared. The murals depicted rituals, human figures in hooded robes gathered around an altar. One figure was always prone, stretched naked beneath a blade. Blood was painted in rust tones, spirals, concentric and endless, twisted around the edges of each fresco. On the far wall was an inscription in Latin, carved into the stone: "Sanguinem dat pactum, radix manet, decamet tres." Blood seals the pact. The root remains. 13. I moved forward, deeper into the catacombs. I hadn't known these tunnels existed beneath the estate. They were not on any blueprints. They should not have been here. The ceilings arched low, the walls lined with niches that held objects, ritual tools, bone totems, jars filled with black, tarry substance. One held a child's shoe. I passed through a second archway and entered a circular room. At its center was a massive stone slab, dark with age, cracked across the middle. Around it stood 13 iron candle holders. Each was empty, save for dried wax and streaks that looked suspiciously like blood. Behind the slab was a wall, different from the others, carved not with ritual scenes but with faces, human faces, some grotesquely deformed, some clearly modeled from real people. At the center, carved more deeply than the rest, was the three-eyed triangle. Below it, etched carefully in English, "Here lies the root, bound in stone, fed in silence." I didn't know what the root truly was, a metaphor, a creature, a spirit, whatever it was, it existed in this room and had been honored, worshipped, and fed for generations. I set my flashlight down and took out my camera. As I snapped photos, the light flickered, the air shifted. I heard a whisper, then another, a child's voice, then an old man's, all repeating the same phrase. Cycle 13 begins. I turned sharply. Nothing, just the echo. Then I noticed something I had missed. The floor was not just stone but etched with a pattern, a spiral leading inward. The center, directly beneath the stone slab, was darker, wetter. I knelt and scraped at it with my knife. The stone gave way. Beneath was a trapdoor. With trembling hands I lifted it. The smell hit first. Decay, dampness, and something sweet, like rotting fruit. A wooden ladder descended into a pit. I counted the rungs as I climbed down. 13. The space below was a natural cavern, raw and uneven, with walls of slick black rock that shimmered faintly. At the far end stood what could only be described as an altar, but unlike the one above, this was alive, or had been. It pulsed. Veins ran through the stone, glowing faintly red. The surface was covered in glyphs too old to decipher. I recognized none of the writing, only the symbol of the three-eyed triangle, repeated endlessly. Beside the altar were bones, dozens of them, some small, some recent. I turned away to vomit, and then I saw it. Embedded in the back wall of the cavern was a sarcophagus-shaped indentation, and inside it, a body, preserved, mummified by the damp air. A woman in a ceremonial robe, hands folded over her chest, a pendant around her neck, same symbol. It was Judith Ainsworth. She had come down here. She had become part of it, and now it waited for me. My flashlight died. I stumbled back, gasping. The spiral on the ground began to glow faintly, pulsing with the beat of my heart. The whispers returned, 13 voices, all chanting in a language I didn't recognize. My ears bled. My vision swam. I fled, back through the chamber, up the ladder, through the catacombs, but something followed. The walls shifted. I swear they closed in. When I finally burst into the main house, the door slammed behind me. The locks, broken only hours earlier, clicked shut. I collapsed on the floor, trembling. The next day, I tried to leave the house. My car wouldn't start. My phone was dead. Every time I walked toward the gate, I found myself back at the front door. It took me hours to realize. The house had sealed itself. I was the 13th. I was the vessel, and the root had awoken. I didn't sleep the night after I escaped the catacombs. I didn't eat the following day. Time fractured in the house. Every sound, floorboards creaking, wind against the windows, the subtle groan of stone beneath my feet, felt magnified, synchronized to a rhythm that wasn't mine. The spiral below the house still pulsed, even if I could no longer see it. I felt it in my veins, but despite the dread, I knew what I had to do. On the third day, I forced myself to act. The rituals had relied on secrecy for nearly 2 centuries, rituals carried out in silence, in agreement, in complicity. The only way to break their power was to expose them. I gathered everything I had, the liturgy of the 13th cycle, the diary of Edwin Ainsworth, Miriam's letters, the ritual photographs, the altar glyphs I had sketched by hand. I included photos of the underground altar, the faces carved into the stone, and the preserved body I now knew with certainty was Judith. I uploaded them all to a secure drive. Then I called Eleanor Wright. "I have what you need," I said, "all of it." She met me the next morning on the outskirts of Huddersfield, away from the village center, in a cafe beneath a railway overpass. She wore sunglasses, a scarf pulled tightly around her neck. Paranoia wasn't unreasonable. When I showed her the photos, she turned pale. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "They actually did it. They actually followed through." I handed her the drive. "Everything is there. Publish it. Expose it. Make it undeniable." She hesitated. "You realize what this means? They'll come after me. After you. This isn't just folklore anymore. This is criminal conspiracy, cult activity, multiple disappearances." "I don't care anymore," I said. "The house won't let me leave, but the story can." She promised to do what she could. Within 72 hours, she published an exposé under the title, "The 13th Cycle, Ritual Sacrifice in Modern-Day Yorkshire." It went live on independent investigative platforms, then exploded on social media. Forums picked it up. Paranormal blogs dissected every image. Readers connected the dots. Missing persons, burned records, the connection to the Church of the New Resurrection, the Ainsworth lineage, and then came the inevitable backlash. Local authorities released a statement claiming the story was a hoax, orchestrated by an outsider with a history of mental distress. They dismissed the images as fabricated and the documents as historical fiction. The official police file opened under the category of online disinformation, but they couldn't control everything. A week later, an anonymous source leaked additional documents to the press, sealed property agreements, council minutes, and, most damningly, photographs taken inside the Huddersfield Chapel, photographs showing the hidden altar panel and the tin box with the medallion. That was the turning point. The Church of the New Resurrection was forced to release a public statement. They called the rituals a heretical offshoot long since disavowed, blaming a fringe sect within their ranks active during the early 20th century. They denied all knowledge of modern activity, but the village knew better. People began to talk, quietly at first, then loudly. Names surfaced, council members whose families had participated in past cycles, former reverends, landowners whose properties had surrounded the Ainsworth estate. A map emerged, revealing how tightly the entire village had been drawn into the pattern. A formal investigation was announced by a parliamentary task force. Within a month, demolition orders were filed. On the morning of the scheduled demolition, I stood at the edge of the property line. My body refused to cross the threshold of the front gate again. The last time I tried, I collapsed from what doctors described as a neurological event. I knew better. The house would not release me, but it would not let me near again either. I had broken the pact, but not fulfilled it. I watched as contractors arrived, carefully selected, government-supervised, equipped with ground-penetrating radar and hazmat suits. A full forensic team followed. Drones scanned the rooftop, and engineers assessed the structural integrity of the catacombs below. And then, everything stopped. The machinery failed. Radios cut out. One of the lead technicians collapsed while inside. The others fled. They refused to return. The house would not be destroyed. The demolition was delayed indefinitely. That same night, I received a visit. An old man, tall, cloaked, bearing the mark around his neck, 3 eyes in a triangle, knocked on my door. I didn't recognize him. He said his name was Reuben Ainsworth, a cousin lost to time, born in 1932, thought dead during the war. He looked perfectly preserved. "You tried to sever what cannot be severed," he said calmly. "You exposed it, but you did not replace it. A cycle must conclude. You are the last vessel." I backed away. "I won't die for this." "You already have," he whispered. "You just haven't stopped breathing yet." He handed me a knife, ornate iron, carved with the spiral and the date. Cycle 13, initiate. You must seal the root, or it will feed unbound. Not on you, on all. And then he vanished. I never saw him again. I held the blade for days, considered what it meant. Finally, on the next new moon, I returned to the basement. This time, the house let me in. In the weeks following my return to the basement, after holding the iron blade inscribed with my own name, after descending once more into the spiral, something changed. Not just in the house or in me, but in the town, in the country, as if the very act of exposure had ruptured something much older and deeper than I had anticipated. I had sealed nothing. I had simply broken the surface. Eleanor's expose had long since passed viral status. Independent media ran it as an occult investigation. Mainstream outlets hesitated at first, then followed reluctantly, framing it as a disturbing local myth with real criminal implications. But for those of us who had been inside the ritual, who had felt the pressure of history and blood, it was no myth. The Ainsworth name, once obscure even in its own village, became a symbol of hidden lineages, of intergenerational conspiracies, of institutional rot. A wave of investigations followed. Parliament convened a special inquiry, and Home Office officials raided the Huddersfield Municipal Archives. A half-century of missing records were recovered, dozens of edited parish registries, sealed court transcripts, and a set of private correspondences between the Church of the New Resurrection and local magistrates dating back to 1924. That's when the pattern emerged. Huddersfield had not been alone. Scattered across the UK, Wiltshire, the Lake District, parts of Northumberland, similar families began surfacing. Names that recurred in quiet corners of public record, always appearing on property deeds surrounding ancient earthworks or Neolithic sites, always involved in unexplained disappearances, always with a similar glyph present, sometimes etched into barn doors, sometimes burned into chapel beams. 3 eyes, 1 triangle, spirals. They called it the root pattern. One of the investigators coined the term in a leaked memo. A cross-regional cultic infrastructure centered on bloodline stewardship and ritual sacrifice, potentially spanning over 150 years. Parliament demanded answers. The Church of the New Resurrection dissolved within weeks, citing irreparable internal fractures. Civil cases were filed. Protesters gathered at rural estates, waving banners that read, "No more vessels, no more silence." And yet, in Huddersfield, nothing changed. Ainsworth House still stood. Demolition had been indefinitely postponed due to what officials termed structural instability of unknown origin. Contractors refused the site. Equipment failed repeatedly. The local council remained silent, refusing interviews, stating only that further geological assessments were required. I remained on the property, not because I wished to, but because I could not leave. Every time I attempted to travel beyond a few miles, I grew violently ill. Nausea, migraines, seizures. It was as if the house, or the spiral beneath it, had hooked itself into my marrow. I documented everything, each change, each noise, each reappearance of the glyph. By January, new symbols began appearing on the interior walls, ones I hadn't noticed before, etched faintly into the wood beneath layers of paint. Not just spirals, but trees, or what resembled trees, roots descending, branching like veins. Beneath each, Roman numerals. I counted them. There were 13, of course. And then came the visitors, people from other regions, some drawn by the articles, some because they claimed to recognize the house. Many were older, some carried old notebooks, fragments of diaries, crumbling maps. They came not for interviews, but to confess. One man in his 70s told me that his grandfather had vanished in 1949 and that his family never spoke of it. But he was last seen near Huddersfield, the man said, and he had the mark tattooed on his chest. Another woman, sharp-eyed, calm, handed me a page torn from a book of shadows. On it, the triangle, the spiral, and a line written in Welsh, "Panfyd I blodinion agor, rhaid i'r grade in gale e fwydo." When the flower opens, the root must be fed. She told me it was part of a Gower Peninsula ritual, practiced until 1933, when the last vessel disappeared, her great-aunt. None of them asked to come inside the house. They only stood near the gate and left offerings, apples, bones, salt circles. At first I rejected all of this as hysteria, mass psychosis, trauma made symbolic. But one night I dreamt of the altar again, and this time it was full. Not just the slab, the walls, covered in faces, all of them mine. The next morning I received a package in the post, no return address. Inside, a first edition of a book titled The Tethered Line, Blood Ritual and Memory in Post-Roman Britain. A yellow sticky note was attached. It started before them. Keep reading. I did. The book, written in 1981 by a discredited anthropologist named Dr. A.W. Harrow, described a phenomenon across pre-Christian Britain. Families entrusted with maintaining root seals, geographic nexuses believed to contain entities beneath the soil. Harrow's theory was fringe. He suggested that these roots were living consciousnesses bound by sacrifice, each requiring regular feeding to remain dormant. He mentioned 13 known sites. One was in Huddersfield, another in France, another in Vermont. The others? Unknown. The book had been banned by several university presses. Harrow had vanished in 1987. I copied the locations, created a map. Patterns emerged. A circle, a cycle, not linear, rotational. Then Eleanor contacted me again, this time by burner phone. "I think they're activating again," she said. "Who?" "All of them." I didn't understand. She explained. Since the publication, at least 4 unconnected rural families in England had begun reporting strange behavior. Objects rearranged, pets mutilated, children speaking in dead languages. One child in Wales had drawn the triangle obsessively for weeks before falling into a coma. All of them had some genetic link to one of the 13 locations. The pact had never been about Huddersfield alone. It had always been a chain, a network, a lattice of blood and soil. And my exposure had triggered it. I wanted to burn the house. I truly did. I poured petrol into the basement. I lit the match. It fizzled. The spiral on the floor drank the flame. I tried explosives. They failed. I hired a demolition crew under false pretenses. Their equipment locked up. It wasn't just indestructible. It was sentient, and it wasn't alone. By spring, whispers began of similar events abroad. A collapsed farmhouse in Quebec. Beneath it, a chamber with glyphs. An abandoned orphanage in Galicia, its basement tiled in spirals. A church floor in rural Bavaria, removed for restoration, revealing 13 concentric rings, each painted with blood, and beneath each site, Roots, literal, black-veined roots, pulsing, breathing, waiting. I no longer dream. Sleep still visits me, but it no longer offers respite, only silence. A silence thick with memory, with weight, with the soft, slow breathing of something beneath my skin that no longer feels entirely human. My name is still mine. My voice is still mine. But when I look into the mirror, I see someone waiting, and I no longer ask who. The house is quiet now. Not still, but quiet. The walls no longer whisper. The shadows no longer move. The spiral in the cellar glows only faintly, like the final pulse of a heart that has not yet decided whether to stop. I walk the halls each morning, counting footsteps, tracing my hand along the banister worn smooth by generations of Ainsworths. I imagine Judith doing the same. Elias, Miriam, Edwin, all of them. Vessels, watchers, keepers of a promise no one fully understood and none dared to refuse. Some part of me wishes I hadn't come here, that I had ignored the letter, that I had never opened the basement door. But a deeper part, a darker, older voice, knows that I didn't choose this. I was chosen. The pact didn't end with revelation. It began again with remembrance. There are names I now speak only in my head. Cycles I count by instinct. Symbols I trace in dust without realizing it. A rhythm I've inherited not in music, but in marrow. I am no longer merely a man. I am soil and seed and stone. And yet I am still watching. I keep the documents safe, hidden, but intact. The diary, the ledger, the altar sketches. Copies now exist in hands beyond mine. I made sure of it. If I vanish, if the house swallows me like it did Judith, others will know. Others will remember. That is all we can do now. Remember. Because there are more than 13 sites, more than 13 names, more than one route, and they are waking. In cemeteries beneath churches long forgotten. In basements where salt lines have faded. In villages where children speak words older than their blood. We thought we were burying evil when we buried the past, but we weren't. We were feeding it, and we still are. If you have listened to this story, if you followed it from the first whisper in the wallpaper to the last breath beneath the altar, then you are now part of it too. Memory is the last form of resistance. If this story has unsettled something in you, don't look away. Don't dismiss it. You may recognize the name Ainsworth, or not. You may live miles away from Huddersfield, or beneath different stars altogether. But the root grows wherever memory weakens. Feed it silence, and it thrives. Expose it to light, and it recoils. So remember, tell someone, share this. Leave no version of this story untold. It doesn't matter if they laugh, if they call it fiction, because somewhere, beneath someone's floorboards, the spiral is already waking, and the 13th is only ever the beginning. If this story has haunted you, don't let it fade like so many others, like so many names we were told to forget, like Judith, like Miriam, like me, like you, like all of us. Subscribe, share, speak, and do not stop counting.